The massive Vortak warship Crimson Talon drifted through the void like a predator stalking its prey. Its hull gleamed with purple metal that could deflect most energy weapons, and rows of plasma cannons lined its sides like deadly teeth. Commander Zexhai stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed as he stared at the small human vessel ahead. "Pathetic," he hissed, his serpentine tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air. "These humans think they can challenge the might of the Vortak Empire with that thing." The human ship was indeed a strange sight. While most vessels in known space were sleek and modern, this one looked like it had been pulled from a museum. Its hull was made of simple steel, painted white with blue stripes. No energy shields flickered around it. No plasma weapons were visible on its surface. Instead, the ship bristled with what appeared to be ancient projectile weapons, massive metal tubes that pointed in all directions. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Craw from the weapons station, "our scanners show that vessel is over 300 years old. It appears to be some kind of historical warship that humans call a battleship. The weapons are primitive kinetic projectiles." A ripple of laughter passed through the bridge crew. Several junior officers chittered in amusement, their scales changing color with mirth. Commander Zexhai's mandibles clicked in what passed for a grin among his species. "Kinetic projectiles," he repeated, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Metal balls fired by chemical explosions? What's next, will they throw rocks at us?" The human vessel hung motionless in space, its ancient hull scarred by centuries of use. This was the USS Missouri, though the aliens couldn't read the human writing on its side. They saw only an outdated relic that somehow thought it could stand against their advanced technology. "Commander," came a voice from the communication station, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're demanding we leave this system immediately." "Let them through," Zexhai ordered, eager to hear what these primitives had to say. The main screen flickered, and, suddenly, they were looking at the bridge of the human ship. An elderly human male stood at the center, his gray hair neatly combed and his blue uniform pressed and clean. Behind him, other humans worked at stations that looked impossibly primitive compared to Vortak technology. "This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, his voice calm and steady. "You are trespassing in human space. Turn around immediately, or we will be forced to take action." Commander Zexhai couldn't contain his amusement. He activated the return communication, letting his image appear on the human screen. The sight of his 7-foot frame and razor-sharp teeth had sent many species running in terror. "Human," he said, drawing out the word like an insult, "I am Commander Zexhai of the Vortak Third Fleet. Your primitive vessel is no match for our superior technology. Surrender now, and we may allow some of your crew to live as slaves." Admiral Chan's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost bored. "I'll give you one more chance, Commander. Turn around and leave our space. Consider this your only warning." The Vortak bridge erupted in laughter. Several officers had to hold their sides as they chittered with glee. Commander Zexhai wiped a tear from one of his 6 eyes. "Warning," he gasped between laughs. "You're going to warn us? With what, your ancient popguns? Our shields can stop any kinetic projectile ever created. Your weapons are museum pieces." "Sir," interrupted the tactical officer, "our sensors show they're loading something into their main guns." "Should we be concerned?" Commander Zexhai glanced at his screens. The human ship's massive gun turrets were indeed moving, the ancient metal mechanisms groaning as they turned to face the Vortak vessel. Each turret held 3 enormous cannons, bigger than anything the Vortak had seen outside of orbital defense platforms. "Concerned?" Zexhai laughed again. "About weapons that were obsolete before we achieved spaceflight? These humans still use chemical propulsion to throw metal slugs. Our energy shields will absorb the impact like raindrops." On the human ship, Admiral Chen turned to his weapons officer. "Load the special rounds, Commander Williams." "Aye, sir," came the crisp reply. "Loading magnetically enhanced depleted uranium rounds with explosive tips." The Admiral's weathered face showed a slight smile. He'd spent 40 years in the Terran Defense Force, and he'd seen his share of arrogant aliens who thought human weapons were primitive. They always learned the hard way that there was a difference between primitive and ineffective. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "alien ship is maintaining position. Their shields are at full power, and they're laughing at us on all communication channels." "Let them laugh," Admiral Chen said quietly. "Range to target?" 12 kilometers and, closing, sir. Well within effective range. The Admiral nodded. The Missouri's main guns had been designed over 3 centuries ago to hurl massive shells at enemy warships on Earth's oceans. But, human engineers had been busy over the years. The ship had been completely rebuilt from the inside out, though it kept its classical appearance. The guns now used magnetic acceleration to increase muzzle velocity by a factor of 10. The shells were made of depleted uranium, one of the densest materials known to science, and tipped with explosives that could punch through any armor. All guns, target the enemy's main weapons array, the Admiral ordered. Prepare to fire on my command. Back on the Vortak ship, Commander Zexhai was still enjoying himself. He'd ordered his crew to record everything so they could show other species what happened when primitives challenged Vortak superiority. The humans were actually going to try to fight with their antique weapons. It would be the most amusing battle in fleet history. Sir, his science officer called out, I'm detecting some unusual energy readings from their weapon systems. It appears they've modified their ancient guns somehow. Modified how? Zexhai asked, though he wasn't particularly concerned. Did they paint them a different color? Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Commander Zexhai waved a dismissive hand. Probably just their primitive electronics. Nothing they could do would make those weapons a threat to us. The truth was that the Vortak, for all their advanced technology, had never encountered weapons quite like the Missouri's guns. Most spacefaring species had abandoned kinetic weapons millennia ago in favor of energy-based systems. Plasma cannons, laser arrays, and particle beams were the norm throughout the galaxy. The idea of using physical projectiles seemed absurdly backward. What they didn't understand was that humans had never really abandoned kinetic weapons, they'd simply perfected them. While other species focused on energy shields and plasma technology, humans had spent centuries learning how to make things go very fast and hit very hard. Alien vessel is still approaching, sir, reported the Missouri's navigator. They're not taking evasive action. Admiral Chen nodded. The Vortak ship was coming straight at them, probably planning to ram them after their shields collapsed under the primitive bombardment. It was a common tactic among species who believed in their technological superiority. Very well, the Admiral said. All batteries, you are free to engage. Show them what the United States Navy can do. The command echoed through the Missouri's corridors, reaching gun crews who had trained for years for this moment. These weren't raw recruits, they were specialists who understood their weapons better than any alien understood their technology. Each gun crew had practiced for countless hours, learning to work as a single coordinated unit. Gun crew number 1, ready to fire. Gun crew number 2, ready to fire. Gun crew number 3, ready to fire. The reports came in one by one as 9 massive cannons prepared to demonstrate why humans had never quite given up their love affair with kinetic weapons. On the Vortak bridge, sensors were detecting massive energy buildups in the human weapons, but Commander Zexhai remained unconcerned. Energy buildup just meant bigger explosions when the shells bounced harmlessly off his shields. Distance to target, 8 kilometers, his navigator reported. Perfect, Zexhai said. At this range, even these primitives can't miss. When their weapons fail to penetrate our shields, we'll open fire and show them what real weapons can do. He turned to his weapons officer. Prepare all plasma batteries. We'll give them a demonstration of superior firepower. What Commander Zexhai didn't realize was that Admiral Chen had fought in the Centauri War, where human forces had faced off against the technologically advanced Altarian Empire. He'd learned then that aliens often made the mistake of underestimating human ingenuity. They saw primitive technology and assumed primitive tactics. They never suspected that humans had spent centuries perfecting the art of making simple things extraordinarily effective. Admiral, the Missouri's tactical officer called out, enemy vessel is charging weapons. Plasma signatures across their hull. Let them charge, Admiral Chan replied calmly. They won't get the chance to fire. All guns, target acquired. Fire when ready. The moment had come. 3 centuries of human naval tradition, combined with the finest technology humanity could produce, was about to meet alien arrogance head-on. Commander Zexhai watched his screens as the human turrets completed their rotation. The massive guns were now pointed directly at his ship. He could see small figures moving around the weapons, probably making final adjustments to their targeting systems. "This should be entertaining," he said to his crew. "Watch how their primitive shells bounce off our shields like pebbles." But, deep in the Missouri's gun turrets, something very different from pebbles was about to be unleashed. Each shell weighed nearly a ton and was accelerated by magnetic fields to speeds that would have been impossible with chemical propulsion alone. The depleted uranium cores were denser than any natural material, and the explosive tips were designed to punch through armor that could stop energy weapons cold. "Fire!" Admiral Chen commanded. 9 massive guns spoke as one, their roar echoing through the Missouri's hull despite the vacuum of space. The shell streaked across the void, moving faster than anything the Vortex sensors had ever tracked. They covered the 8 kilometers between the ships in less than 2 seconds, giving the aliens no time to react. Commander Zexai watched the incoming projectiles with amusement that quickly turned to confusion, then shock, then horror. The shells weren't slowing down as they approached his shields. Instead, they seemed to be accelerating, their massive bulk glowing with kinetic energy. The first shell hit the Vortex shields and kept going. The energy barrier that could have stopped a plasma bolt flared once and collapsed like tissue paper. The depleted uranium core punched through the ship's armor as if it weren't there, the explosive tip detonating deep inside the hull. Before Commander Zexai could even process what had happened, 8 more shells followed the first. Each one tore through his ship's defenses like they didn't exist, ripping massive holes in the seemingly invincible Vortex warship. The bridge shook violently as explosions rocked the vessel. Warning alarms screamed as atmosphere vented from dozens of hull breaches. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the red glow of emergency systems. "Impossible!" Zexai screamed, his forearms flailing as he tried to maintain his balance. "Our shields! Our armor! How did they?" His science officer, bleeding from a head wound, looked up from his damaged console. "Sir, the projectiles were moving at 12% of light speed. The kinetic energy was..." He paused to calculate, equivalent to our main plasma cannons. The terrible truth was sinking in. The humans hadn't been using primitive weapons at all. They'd taken primitive weapons and made them devastatingly modern. While the Vortex had focused on developing better energy weapons, humans had spent centuries learning how to make physical objects move faster than physics should have allowed. "Damage report," Commander Zexai demanded, though he already knew it was bad. The ship was listing to one side, and he could hear the groaning of stressed metal throughout the hull. "Sir, we've lost main weapons, engines are at 30%, and we have breaches on 15 decks. The humans, they're requesting our surrender." Commander Zexai stared at the main screen, where Admiral Chen's calm face had reappeared. The human looked exactly the same as before, no excitement, no gloating, just professional competence. "This is Admiral Chen," the human said. "Your vessel is severely damaged. Surrender immediately, and we'll provide medical assistance to your crew." For a moment, Commander Zexai considered refusing. The pride of the Vortex Empire demanded that he fight to the death rather than surrender to primitives. But, as another explosion rocked the ship, he realized that pride wouldn't save his crew from dying in the cold vacuum of space. "How?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How did you do that?" Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "Commander, your people made the same mistake many others have made. You assumed that because our weapons look old, they must be ineffective. But humans have been perfecting the art of war for thousands of years. We don't abandon tactics that work, we improve them." The communication cut out, leaving Commander Zexai staring at a blank screen. Around him, his crew worked frantically to keep their ship from breaking apart entirely. The mighty Vortex warship, pride of the Third Fleet, had been crippled in a single volley by weapons that the aliens had dismissed as museum pieces. As emergency teams rushed to seal hull breaches and tend to the wounded, Commander Zexai finally understood what had happened. The humans hadn't been using primitive weapons at all. They'd been using perfectly evolved weapons that had been refined over centuries of constant warfare. The shells that had torn through his ship weren't simple metal balls, they were precision-engineered projectiles that combined the latest in materials science with magnetic acceleration technology. The guns that fired them weren't crude chemical cannons, they were hybrid systems that used controlled explosions and magnetic fields to achieve velocities that most species considered impossible. But, perhaps most importantly, the crew that operated those weapons weren't primitive barbarians. They were highly trained specialists who had spent years learning their craft. Every human on that ancient-looking ship was a master of their particular skill, working together with the precision that only came from generations of naval tradition. The Missouri hung in space nearby, its guns still trained on the crippled Vorthack vessel. To an outside observer, it still looked like a museum piece, an ancient relic from humanity's primitive past. But Commander Zexai now knew the truth. The ship wasn't a relic at all. It was a predator, perfectly camouflaged to look harmless while carrying weapons that could destroy any vessel in known space. As his crew worked to save their ship, Commander Zexai made a mental note to update the Vorthack databases. The entry for human weapons technology would need significant revisions. And, the next time someone suggested that humans used primitive weapons, he would be sure to tell them about the day an ancient battleship had taught the Vorthack Empire the difference between primitive appearance and primitive effectiveness. 3 hours after the battle, rescue ships from both fleets hung in the void like hovering angels. The Vorthack vessel Crimson Talon was a broken shell of its former self, held together by emergency force fields and the desperate efforts of its engineering crew. The Missouri maintained its position nearby, its ancient guns still loaded and ready, though Admiral Chen had allowed medical teams aboard the alien vessel. Commander Zexai found himself in the unusual position of being grateful to the very enemy who had just humiliated his forces. Human medical personnel had arrived within minutes of the surrender, their equipment primitive-looking but surprisingly effective. They'd saved 17 Vorthack crew members who would have died without immediate treatment. "Your medics," he said to Admiral Chen during their second communication, "they understand Vorthack physiology remarkably well." Admiral Chen nodded from his position on the Missouri's bridge. Behind him, the ancient instruments still glowed with soft light, a reminder that the ship was very much alive despite its age. "We make it our business to understand our neighbors, Commander. Even the hostile ones." The admission stung, but Zexai couldn't argue with it. The Vorthack had invaded human space expecting easy conquest, and, instead they'd found an enemy that understood them better than they understood themselves. "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Craw from his position at what remained of the tactical station, "long-range sensors are detecting multiple ships approaching. It's the rest of the Third Fleet." Admiral Chen's tactical officer had detected the same incoming vessels. "Admiral, we're reading 12 Vorthack warships on approach. They'll be here in 6 hours." Commander Zexai felt his scaled hide flush with embarrassment. Protocol demanded that he warn the humans about the approaching fleet, but doing so would mean admitting that he'd called for reinforcements against a single primitive vessel. "Admiral," he said reluctantly, "my fleet is approaching. 12 ships of the line, including the flagship Dark Sun. Admiral Frackmon commands the fleet personally." Admiral Chen considered this information calmly. 12 ships against one ancient battleship seemed like impossible odds, but the humans had already demonstrated that appearances could be deceiving. "Thank you for the warning, Commander. Will Admiral Frackmon be interested in a peaceful resolution?" Zexai's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. "Admiral Frackmon believes that mercy is a weakness and diplomacy is for species too weak to take what they want. He will see your victory over my ship as a fluke, and he will be determined to prove Vorthack superiority." "I see," Admiral Chen said. "Then, I suppose we'll have to educate him as well." As the communication ended, Admiral Chen turned to his executive officer. "Commander Rodriguez, Signal Fleet Command. Tell them we may need additional support." "Aye, sir," Rodriguez replied. "Though our nearest ships are 8 hours out." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Missouri would have to face the entire Vorthack Third Fleet alone. It wouldn't be the first time a single ship had stood against overwhelming odds, and if human naval tradition was any guide, it wouldn't be the last. Meanwhile, aboard the approaching Vorthack flagship, Admiral Frackmon paced his bridge like a caged predator. Unlike Commander Zexai's relatively modest vessel, the Dark Sun was a true fortress of space. Nearly 2 kilometers long and, bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon, it represented the pinnacle of Vorthack military technology. "How?" Frackmon demanded for the 100th time. "How does a single primitive vessel defeat one of our warships?" His intelligence officer, a nervous creature named Siskval, consulted his reports again. "Sir, all we know is that the humans used kinetic projectiles. Commander Zexai's damage reports show massive hull breaches consistent with high-velocity impacts." "Kinetic projectiles," Frackmon spat. "Metal slugs thrown by chemical explosions. Even if they somehow improved the velocity, our shield should have stopped them." "Yes, sir, that's what makes this so puzzling. Our shield technology is generations ahead of anything humans possess. Admiral Frackmon stopped pacing and fixed his subordinate with a stare that had caused lesser beings to faint.
Are you suggesting that primitive humans have developed weapons superior to ours?
No sir, Siskval stammered.
I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Perhaps Commander Zexhai made an error in battle, or the humans got lucky. The Admiral's expression made it clear what he thought of that explanation. Luck didn't punch 9 holes through Vortak armor.
Luck didn't collapse military-grade shields. And luck certainly didn't leave a proud warship drifting helpless in space. Sir, called the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel.
They're requesting a parley.
Put it through, Frackmon ordered. He was curious to see what these primitives thought they could accomplish with words.
The main screen shimmered and resolved into the image of Admiral Chen's bridge. Frackmon had to admit that the human commander looked remarkably calm for someone about to face 12 warships with only one. I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Force, the human said. I presume you're Admiral Frackmon?
I am, Frackmon replied. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience.
You will surrender immediately, human.
Your lucky victory over Commander Zexhai means nothing against the full might of the Third Fleet.
Admiral Chan's expression didn't change.
Admiral, I've had a productive conversation with Commander Zexhai about the situation. Perhaps you'd like to hear his assessment of our capabilities before you commit your fleet to battle.
I've read his reports, Frackmon said dismissively.
Damaged shields, faulty sensors, crew error, these things happen in battle.
They won't happen again.
Admiral Chen sighed, the sound of someone who had had this exact conversation many times before.
Admiral, I'm going to give you the same offer I gave your subordinate. Turn around and leave human space. This is your only warning. The Vortak bridge erupted in hissing laughter. The idea that a single human ship could threaten an entire fleet was beyond absurd. Admiral Frackmon himself chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding together.
Human, you face the pride of the Vortak Empire. 12 ships of the line, each one capable of destroying a planet. Do you really think your ancient vessel can stand against us all?
I think, Admiral Chen said quietly, that you're about to learn the same lesson Commander Zexhai learned. Human weapons may look primitive, but appearances can be deceiving. Back on the Missouri, preparations for battle were already underway.
The ship's crew moved with practiced efficiency, checking systems and loading specialized ammunition.
Unlike the previous engagement, this would require everything the old battleship could deliver. Commander Williams, Admiral Chen called to his weapons officer, break out the experimental rounds.
Sir? Williams looked surprised.
The tungsten penetrators? Those are still in testing. And this seems like an excellent field test.
Load all guns with penetrator rounds, and prepare the secondary batteries.
As the crew worked, Admiral Chen walked through the ship's corridors.
The Missouri had been in service for over 3 centuries, but every few decades she received upgrades that kept her competitive with modern vessels. Her hull might be steel instead of exotic alloys, but that steel had been reinforced with materials that didn't exist when the ship was first built. In the main armory, technicians carefully loaded shells that represented the cutting edge of human materials science. Each tungsten penetrator weighed twice as much as the standard rounds and had been designed specifically to defeat advanced energy shields. The tips contained exotic matter that became increasingly unstable as it moved faster, creating a delayed action explosive effect. Sir, called Chief Petty Officer Martinez, these rounds have never been used in actual combat. We're not entirely sure how they'll perform.
Admiral Chen examined one of the massive shells. Chief, I have complete confidence in human engineering.
If our scientists say these rounds will work, then they'll work. The truth was that the experimental rounds represented years of captured alien technology being reverse-engineered and improved upon. Humans had a talent for taking enemy innovations and making them better than the original.
The tungsten penetrators were the result of studying Vortak shield technology and designing projectiles specifically to exploit its weaknesses.
5 hours later, the Vortak fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a display that had intimidated countless species across the galaxy. 12 massive warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons that could sterilize worlds.
At their center, the flagship Dark Sun dwarfed everything around it, a monument to Vortak engineering and military might. Admiral Thrakmon stood on his bridge, surveying the tactical display with satisfaction. The human vessel looked even more pathetic when compared to his fleet. A single ancient ship against 12 modern warships, the outcome was inevitable. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships are to target the human vessel. We'll end this with a single coordinated strike." "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the human ship is moving. They're taking position near the edge of the system's asteroid field." Thrakmon nodded approvingly. The humans were trying to use the asteroids for cover, a sensible but futile tactic. Vortex sensors could track a target through solid rock, and their weapons could vaporize asteroids as easily as they destroyed ships. "Maintain formation and advance," he commanded. "These primitives want to hide among rocks like the vermin they are." What Admiral Thrakmon didn't realize was that Admiral Chen had chosen his position very carefully. The asteroid field contained several large metallic asteroids with unusual properties. Human miners had discovered them months earlier and classified them as gravitationally anomalous. Now those same asteroids would serve a very different purpose. "Distance to target?" Admiral Chen asked. 15 kilometers and, closing, his navigator reported. "The alien fleet is maintaining tight formation." "Perfect. Commander Williams, are all guns loaded?" "Yes, sir. All 9 main guns loaded with experimental penetrators, and secondary batteries loaded with standard rounds." Admiral Chen nodded. The Missouri's secondary batteries consisted of smaller guns that had been added during her most recent refit. While not as powerful as the main armament, they fired faster and could engage multiple targets simultaneously. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "the aliens are hailing us again. Put them through." Admiral Thrakmon's image filled the screen, his reptilian features twisted with contempt. "Human, this is your final chance to surrender. My fleet will show no mercy to those who resist the will of the Vortex Empire." Admiral Chen's response was calm and measured. "Admiral, you're making the same mistake your subordinate made. You see an old ship and assume it's helpless. That assumption is going to cost you." "We shall see," Thrakmon hissed. All ships, open fire. 12 Vortex warships unleashed their fury simultaneously. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and exotic energy weapons lit up space like an artificial sun. The combined firepower was enough to crack a small moon, all of it focused on the Missouri's position. But the ancient battleship wasn't there anymore. Admiral Chen had anticipated the alien attack and used the asteroid field to his advantage. As the Vortex weapons fired, the Missouri had positioned itself behind one of the gravitationally anomalous asteroids. The alien weapons struck the asteroid and were absorbed by its strange properties, dissipating harmlessly into space. "Now," Admiral Chen commanded. The Missouri emerged from behind the asteroid like a predator striking from ambush. All 9 main guns fired at once, their tungsten penetrators streaking across space at velocities that defied conventional physics. The experimental rounds had been designed not just to penetrate shields, but to punch through multiple targets in a single shot. The lead Vortex cruiser never had a chance. The first penetrator tore through its shields, hull, and engines before exploding in a chain reaction that split the ship in half. The second and third shells found their marks milliseconds later, crippling 2 more vessels before the aliens even realized they were under attack. Impossible. Admiral Thrakmon screamed as his tactical display showed 3 ships destroyed or disabled in the space of seconds. How did they achieve those velocities? His science officer was frantically analyzing sensor data. "Sir, the projectiles were moving at nearly 15% of light speed. The kinetic energy alone, and there's something else. The rounds seem to have some kind of exotic matter component that increases their destructive power." Before Thrakmon could respond, the Missouri's secondary batteries opened fire. Smaller shells streaked toward the Vortex formation, each one precisely targeted at weapon systems and engine compartments. While not as devastating as the main guns, the secondary weapons were far more numerous and could engage multiple targets simultaneously. 2 more Vortex ships found themselves crippled as dozens of smaller rounds punched through their hulls. The aliens had been so focused on the Missouri's main armament that they'd completely ignored the secondary threat. "Return fire," Thrakmon ordered desperately. "All ships, concentrate on that vessel." But the Missouri was already moving again, using the asteroid field's gravitational anomalies to mask its position. The ship seemed to disappear and reappear at will, striking from unexpected angles before vanishing back into the chaotic sensor environment of the asteroid field. Admiral Chen had spent months studying the local space environment, learning to use every advantage the system could provide. The gravitational anomalies that confused alien sensors were perfectly mapped in the Missouri's computers. The metallic asteroids that absorbed energy weapons had been plotted to the centimeter. Every aspect of the battlefield had been turned into a weapon. "Sir," called the Missouri's tactical officer, "5 enemy ships down, 7 remaining. The flagship is trying to flank us through the outer asteroid belt." Admiral Chen smiled grimly. Admiral Frackmon was learning, trying to use superior numbers and positioning to overcome the Missouri's advantages. But the human commander had been expecting that response. "Load the main guns with cluster rounds," he ordered. "It's time to show them what those secondary asteroids are really for." As the Vortak flagship and its escorts moved through the outer asteroid belt, they had no idea that many of the asteroids around them weren't natural formations at all. Human engineers had spent weeks placing hollow metal shells throughout the belt, each one filled with thousands of small explosive charges. When the Missouri's cluster rounds detonated among the fake asteroids, the result was spectacular. Thousands of small explosions lit up space as the hidden charges were triggered by the ship's weapons. The Vortak vessels found themselves caught in a storm of metal fragments and explosive force that overwhelmed their shields and tore through their hulls. Admiral Frackmon watched in horror as his proud fleet was systematically destroyed by tactics he'd never imagined. The humans weren't just using superior weapons, they were using the entire battlefield as a weapon. Every asteroid, every gravitational anomaly, every piece of space debris had been turned into a tool of war. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "4 more ships are requesting permission to surrender. Engineering reports critical damage to our main engines." For the first time in his career, Admiral Frackmon faced the possibility of defeat. His mighty fleet, the pride of the Vortak Empire, had been reduced to scattered wreckage by a single human vessel that looked like it belonged in a museum. On the Missouri's bridge, Admiral Chen surveyed the tactical display with professional satisfaction. 8 Vortak ships had been destroyed or disabled, and the remaining 4 were clearly beaten. The flagship was still dangerous, but its engines were damaged and its weapons systems were operating at reduced capacity. "Open a channel to the Vortak flagship," he ordered. Admiral Frackmon's face appeared on the screen, his usual arrogance replaced by something approaching respect. The proud alien commander looked like he'd aged years in the past hour. "You fought well, human," Frackmon admitted grudgingly. "But this isn't over. The Empire will send more fleets, better prepared for your tactics." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps they will, Admiral. But they'll face the same problem you did. You see weapons that look primitive and assume they are primitive. You see tactics that seem simple and assume they're ineffective. That assumption has cost you 8 ships and hundreds of lives. What do you want?" Frackmon asked bluntly. "The same thing I wanted 6 hours ago," Admiral Chen replied. "Turn around and leave human space. Take your survivors and go home. Tell your empire that humans aren't the primitives you thought we were." The communication ended, leaving Admiral Frackmon staring at a blank screen. Around him, his crew worked to keep their damaged flagship operational while rescue ships moved to collect survivors from the destroyed vessels. As the Vortak fleet limped away from human space, Admiral Frackmon finally understood what Commander Zexai had tried to tell him. The humans weren't using primitive weapons at all. They were using evolved weapons, perfected over centuries of constant warfare and improved with technology that the Vortak hadn't even imagined. The Missouri hung in space among the asteroids, its ancient hull scarred but unbroken. To any observer, it still looked like a relic from humanity's past. But Admiral Frackmon now knew the truth. The ship wasn't a relic, it was a masterpiece of military engineering, disguised to look harmless while carrying enough firepower to destroy an entire fleet. And, somewhere in the depths of Vortak space, military analysts would soon be frantically revising their assessment of human capabilities. The entry for primitive human weapons would be deleted entirely, replaced by a new classification, extremely dangerous, approach with extreme caution. Word of the Missouri's victory spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within weeks, every major species had heard some version of the story. An ancient human warship had single-handedly defeated an entire Vortak fleet using weapons that most civilizations had abandoned millennia ago. The reaction varied from species to species.
But one emotion was common to all: disbelief.
On the Altarian homeworld, the High Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications.
The Altarians prided themselves on their advanced energy weapons and quantum shield technology.